Hello, this is Ashutosh Varshney, and I'm here to talk about the column that I published in ThePrint yesterday. The topic was the new security doctrine that has emerged in Donald Trump's America. A document was published 6 days ago called the National Security Strategy of the United States of America. And a lot of observers were wondering if Mr. Trump actually relies on his instinct to make pronouncements on national security, or is there an underlying strategy there? And now it's clear from this document that there is an underlying strategy. And the key elements of Mr. Trump's worldview, as laid out in this document, focus on Western Europe, China, Latin America, and the Middle East, along with, of course, a criticism of how security, national security, was conceptualized by previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican. India gets a fleeting reference only twice in the document and not in any central way. And before I say something about something critical, let me lay out what the worldview, as expressed in this document, amounts to and is. And so I begin with the two major criticisms that the Trump administration has launched against all previous US administrations. First, that all of them wrongly thought that both a large internal state focusing on welfare and regulation and administration, and a large external state focusing on defense, national security, intelligence, and foreign policy can both be supported with American resources. And that, to Mr. Trump, is an overestimation of America's ability to fund an ambitious state, and the state should be downsized. Second, the document also says that the drive towards globalization and free trade, which was launched in the 1990s, something like 3 decades ago, even a little before that, something like 3 decades ago, that drive was basically wrong because it ended up undermining the industrial base of the United States as industries migrated to China. And it also hollowed out the middle class, which lost jobs, which might have gotten cheaper goods from China, but jobs migrated away from the United States, and therefore the middle class lost jobs. The power of international institutions under globalization also is critiqued, and it's argued that some of these institutions were anti-American in a very outright way, and they don't need America's support at the same level. The reference here is clearly to the United Nations and some of its affiliated organizations, such as the World Bank. From a security perspective, the document says something entirely novel as far as policy goes. The Trump doctrine emphasizes issues of culture and ethnic and racial diversity in its security analysis, both within and without. Internally, Trump wants, to quote, the restoration an invigoration of American spiritual and cultural health without which long term security is impossible. Unquote. The emphasis here is on severely, radically controlling immigration from non Western and by implication also non white countries, as well as the abandonment of the so called DEI policies at home. DEI standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, which promoted racial and ethnic diversity both in the government and non governmental institutions such as the universities and corporations as well. He argues that the era of mass migration is over because migration, especially from non Western countries, has led to a decline in social cohesion, a warping of labor markets, and by representing foreign interests in American polity, these migrants also weaken national security. Externally, the argument is twofold. First, in its foreign policy, the US will not especially promote or cultivate democracies. And it states, the document, that local cultures determine whether democracy is an appropriate governmental form. The United States will deal with foreign countries not on the basis of democracy or the principle of democracy, but purely on the basis of interests. And second, and this is a statement or this is a part of the analysis which has been widely commented on already, Trump believes that America's biggest historical ally, biggest ally at least since 1945, Western Europe, faces, to quote him, a civilizational erasure. And let me cite the full argument in detail and then discuss it. Quote, the larger issues facing Europe include migration policies that are transforming the continent and creating strife, censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition, creating declining birth rates and loss of national identities and self-confidence. Should present trends continue, the European continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less, unquote. And he adds then he would like Europe to remain European and regain its civilizational self-confidence, which, he further adds, will not be provided by the currently ruling parties of Europe. Rather, Europe should embrace the right-wing parties, which are currently in opposition. Only they can restore civilizational self-confidence, and they are called in the document the patriotic parties of Western Europe. And this means Nigel Farage's Reform Party in the UK, Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party in France, and Alternative for Germany, which has been in a mainstream German discussion called a neo-Nazi party, a successor to Hitler. These three parties are certainly indicated here as likely to lead Europe to civilizational self-confidence again. And Europe should also cut off or severely curtail migration from non-European countries is another argument proposed. On Latin America, or the so-called Western Hemisphere, the document revives what was called the Monroe Doctrine in the 19th century through what it calls a Trump corollary, identifying the region as an incontestable sphere of influence for the United States of America. Non-American powers like China must reduce their special relationships and influence in Latin America. In the 19th century, under the Monroe Doctrine, the target was Western Europe. Western European countries should reduce their influence in Latin America, and now the issue is China. In addition, drug cartels and crime syndicates America would like to crush, and the Hispanic immigration from the region will be systematically discouraged. One should note that is not normally known in India, that at 18% of the US population, the Hispanics today, whom immigrated mostly from Latin America, the Hispanics are the biggest minority in the United States now, 1.5 times larger than the African American community. On the Middle East, the document says American foreign policy used to prioritize that region above all other regions, and it is time to reduce the emphasis that was given to the Middle East, primarily because America's oil production and energy production in general has significantly increased and doesn't rely on Middle Eastern oil anymore. But the document adds, quote, conflict remains the Middle East's most troublesome dynamic, unquote. How would America under Trump deal with this? 2 points are made. One, it would not let the region, the Middle East, be dominated by an outright enemy, that's in quotes, meaning Iran and its affiliates in Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Second, it would like to turn the region into, quote, a place of partnership, friendship, and investment, an idea that underlay the Abraham Accords that Mr. Trump signed during his first tenure in the White House. Business, he argues, can dampen conflict, and those opportunities should be explored. Let's turn to China now. China is given more space than any other country in the document. Trump says, quote, have single-handedly reversed more than 3 decades of mistaken assumptions about China, namely that by opening our markets to China, encouraging American business to invest in China, and outsourcing our manufacturers to China, the US, quote unquote, would make China a responsible member of the rules-based international order, unquote. That, the document says, did not happen. And America's elites, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side, as well as its business elites supported by the administrations, were willing enablers, quote unquote, willing enablers of China's rise, which has hurt America economically and also strategically. So how should America deal with China? Economically, China's trade surpluses must end. China enjoys a huge trade surplus vis-a-vis America, and also must end state subsidies, Chinese state subsidies for private entrepreneurs in China, intellectual property theft, and threat to, quote, our supply chains, including rare earth elements, unquote. Please note that rare earths are repeatedly emphasized now in the foreign policy and security and trade doctrines or trade statements of the United States. China has a virtual monopoly, or certainly a huge domination of the rare earth sector in the world, and they are needed for newer technologies, batteries, the AI, etc., etc. So, because of China's specialization in rare earths, it has an advantage, a serious advantage in trade negotiations, which, for example, India does not have or other countries do not have. Then it also adds a strategic argument, which is that for national security, and this should be also cited, deterring a conflict over Taiwan is a priority. People had doubts about how Mr. Trump would deal with Taiwan and Chinese mainland conflict. And this particular document makes it very clear that Taiwan would not be bartered away to mainland China. And the document further talks about the security of the South China Sea, through which, quote, 1/3 of global shipping passes annually, unquote. Through the South China Sea, 1/3 of global shipping passes annually. So, a competitor nation, and this is a term the document has used for China, a competitor nation like China cannot be allowed to militarily dominate the South China Seas and create security issues. How would these goals be achieved? These two goals, the strategic containment as well as an economic containment. While the US will strengthen itself militarily against China, the document says allies must also chip in. Japan and South Korea, two of the longest lasting allies of America after 1945, must increase defense spending as the Europe also has to. And America, quote, must continue to improve commercial and other relations with India to encourage New Delhi to contribute to Indo-Pacific security, including through what used to be called, what is still called Quad, which is a quadrilateral cooperation between Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. So, this is among the two fleeting references to India in the document, only two and both fleeting. In the earlier pages, the document also says that Trump administration brought ceasefire to India and Pakistan during the conflict in May. So let me end with two conclusions. My summary, evaluative summary of the whole document. First, Trump's security doctrine speaks of something that scholars have discussed a lot, but defense policy documents rarely did, if ever. Scholars have said that ethnic or racial diversity does not necessarily undermine national security. It depends on what institutions are created to accommodate such diversity and what's the history of ethnic or racial relations in a country is. And the Trump doctrine in this document makes it very clear that racial and ethnic diversity undermines national security. It would rather have nations which are mono-ethnic, mono-racial than multiracial and multi-ethnic. Second, his approach to India is clearly instrumental, not intrinsic. What do I mean? For all US administrations since Bill Clinton, both Republican and Democratic, India was called, or India US relationship was called, to use Barack Obama's language, the defining relationship of the 21st century. India US relationship was presented to American and world community by the previous administration since 2000 and since 1999 as the most important relationship that the United States would have in the world in the 21st century. For Trump, that's wrong. India matters only for Indo-Pacific security. If India can help United States in that realm, in that region, United States and India would get along well. And if it cannot, then, or does not, then India and United States will continue to have what might be called a low ebb or low significance relationship. So I'll end here, and I'll talk to you in 2 weeks again when I write my next column for the print.